Today on Across the Fence, our birding expert is scoping out something unique, so we'll find out what he saw on our monthly Bird Notes program. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for choosing Across the Fence. I'm Will Michael in this afternoon for Judy Simpson. And as always, it's the fourth Wednesday of the month. We're joined by Mark LaBarr, the conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. Mark, it's always great to have you here and a great opportunity for, thank you for allowing me to jump in for Judy.
This is great. This is great. I know most of the time I'm sitting here talking with Judy, but it's always great when I get to chat with you as well.
Well, especially because I'm about to discover, along with our viewers, that you have been away from Vermont. You've been in some warm weather, so go ahead, make us all jealous and tell us where you've been.
I did have the opportunity in late February and early March to go to the Bahamas. And
bummer.
Yes, it was a very interesting trip because it was warm, it was very nice, and as we joked throughout the trip, this was a trip that was organized by Audubon, the international program of Audubon. And we basically said, as soon as you say, "Oh, I'm doing work in the Bahamas," everybody has this preconception that you're hanging out on the
cynicism
beaches.
Might creep
exactly,
in, sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we were going down to the Bahamas for the past several years. They've been doing work looking for shorebirds, primarily wintering shorebirds, in the Bahamas, and in one bird in particular, which is the piping plover. And this
some significance to that species?
It's a federally listed bird. It's a very small little plover that nests all the way up to Massachusetts. We don't, of course, have them here in Vermont. But it turns out that the Bahamas is host to a large percentage of the wintering population of this species. And so in looking at protecting these birds, they not only look to protect them on the beaches where they nest, but they look to protect the areas that they winter in. So we were down there to help answer some questions.
Studying their winter, and of course, it happened to be very nice weather.
It did happen to be very nice weather, and of course the Bahamas are a nice place to be. I was there 25 years ago. I started my bird career in the Bahamas doing duck work. And the Bahamas sit about 90 to 150 miles off the coast of Florida. And where we were working was on Andros Island. So there's that big island on the very left-hand side of your screen.
Yes.
It's basically east of New Providence, which is where Nassau is. And so I spent 10 days on a sailboat off the west side because...
Let me jump in. Was there some significance to the red circles, Mark?
The red circles were basically areas that had not been explored for this species before.
So now you're exploring, and this is one of the ways you're doing the exploration.
We did. This was our research vessel. Okay, so I flew down to Nassau, flew over to Andros, and then was quickly whisked away and spent the next 10 days basically on that boat trying. The goal was to go up and down the west side of Andros Island and see whether or not we found any piping plovers or other shorebirds there.
Now, you were doing some work from the boat, but my understanding is these are shorebirds. You were in on the shore. You weren't just on the water.
Right.
Okay, so here we go.
Right. So this is basically what we did every day. And then what was interesting and what we found out was the sailboat, which drew about 4.5 feet, oftentimes couldn't get close to the west side of Andros Island. They would often have to anchor 2 to 3, sometimes 4 miles because it's so shallow there. So we had to take this little dinghy and our kayaks and motor into shore to try to look for the birds. Sometimes it was deep enough that we could use our dinghies and motor around. Other times we got in the kayaks with the idea it was that we would stop at various different places, get our scopes out, binoculars out.
And we're seeing here you've got some good equipment.
Yes, right. But all that stuff had to be packed up. It was all, and then we, once we got to shore, we would explore those shores looking not only along the coast, but also on some of the keys that sit off the island. So this is one of the keys called Billy's Key that we were able to actually find some shorebirds, but not.
So from looking through that scope there, then let's segue into what did you find?
Well, that's the thing. One of the things that we found was, and I'm going to call it mud here, but again, everybody thinks that you're in the Bahamas and you've got these gorgeous sand beaches. This was this very thick, heavy, kind of clay almost that was up and down and on the bottom in this very shallow water.
Is there some kind of vegetation there or not?
That's all mangroves, or what used to be mangroves, and the holes there are just from wave action. So we spent a lot of time looking for these birds in this kind of substrate, and when we did get in and out of the boats in order to do some of our work, it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to do.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but he's almost up to his knees.
Yes, and so this is what we encountered, was this thick mud. This is Walker Golder, who's in charge of Audubon, North Carolina, and our Atlantic Flyway Coastal Program. And he's been doing this for quite a few years, going down to the Bahamas, finding piping plovers. And again, this was an area hadn't been explored yet, so we were really kind of testing out and looking for new things, and mud
so as I
was
said,
what we found.
I didn't mean to joke about that.
Yeah.
That is the habitat for these birds. We enjoy the sandy beaches, and it's a beautiful shot here with the water, but the point of the mud and what we're seeing here is that that's where the food is. That's their habitat.
Well, interestingly enough, it wasn't. And that's what we found out. This is a picture that I had. This is the front of my kayak as I'm paddling. We got about 5 to 6 miles back in from the coast into these huge open ponds, again with this same kind of substrate. So this is a view of interior Andros and some of these flats that would open up, but we didn't find the birds. We found some shorebirds, but we didn't find the concentrations that they had found in other expeditions that they'd made to the Bahamas. So it was one of those catch-22s where, no data is still data. We made this work. We were looking for the birds. We didn't find them in these new habitats that we were checking. And so now we can check that off and say, we don't need to spend much more time here. Unfortunately, we were hoping to get to the southern tip of Andros Island, but the transmission on the sailboat broke. And so we got stuck about halfway down and had to turn around and sail the last part of the trip back up north to where we could get picked up again. So the southern end of Andros Island still remains a mystery as far as what the birds are. When we did go back north, and we were on the north end of the island, there's a set of keys called the Jolter Keys. And this is one of the largest areas for piping plovers. This is what the keys look like. So all of a sudden we go from mud to
the
sand.
White sand. Now we're talking my habitat.
Yes, so this is, and this is what the Jolter Keys look like as the tide is going out. And basically, you get miles and miles of these sand flats that open up, and this is where the piping plovers, roughly 4% of all the piping plovers, wintering population are here. So this is that same shot as the water slowly goes down on the north end. So on the 10th day of the trip, the last day, Walker and I put in roughly 24 miles in that little dinghy motoring around the Keys, and we finally did see piping plovers and some other shorebirds.
So we're going to get to that. I just, again, I didn't mean to laugh, but it's a little bit like trains, planes, and automobiles. But now we've added boat failure and the fact that you spent some time. And as you said, no data, that's still data, but you got nothing.
Right. Well, no, we came away with the fact that we don't need to go back there.
But you did manage to see some plovers after all in some of these sandier, beautiful places, and you have a series of shots here to tell us about.
So here's a piping plover. Okay, this one happens to be banded. You can see the bands on it. What's interesting about this one, this is called the Halloween bird because it's an orange and black band. And some of the folks that we were with, that we ended up hooking with up afterward, actually released this bird 4 years prior. So this is some of the information that we're looking. So that was the bird that we were really looking for, but they had expanded it to collect data on other birds. One of the birds that we did find as we were going up and down that west side of Andros was a bird called the Wilson's plover. This is a bird that nests down here as well as in the U.S. And this was probably, from a sandpiper's perspective, when we did see them, these were the birds we saw the most of. And again, not high concentrations, but we would come across them.
And Mark, just to jump in quickly, in terms of a size of this, that Wilson is bigger than the previous one. The Wilson plover looked to be like a small seagull?
No, they're actually about the size of maybe a robin, maybe a little bit smaller, and the piping plover is almost the size of a large sparrow.
Yeah.
So they're really tiny. They're not large birds.
So I interrupted as we get about 2/3 of the way through the program. You've got a sanderling, is what you told me.
So again, this is another shorebird. They're all in their winter plumage. So this is the winter plumage. This was a bird once we got up to the Jolter Keys, we saw more of on a regular basis. And again, all these birds, I'm not a shorebirder by nature, and Walker was excellent at pulling some of these birds out. I did a lot of the motoring. My job was to motor.
But also a real education for you, and great that you're bringing this back to us, because these is not things we get to see.
Right, and it's a great cooperative effort within Audubon. There were many people from various different state programs that work on coastal birds. Of course, I work with terns up north, and so that was my in. But people from Connecticut, North Carolina, New York State that visited different places in the Bahamas, some of those other red circles. Yeah. So whereas I was on the west coast of Andros, these folks were in some other places. And they got to hang out with, like, the executive director.
And they got to hang out, or got to hang out with this guy who is...
Our first day, we had a cluster of semi-palmated plovers that we saw right at the end of the day. The light was going down, and we realized that the sailboat was still 4 miles away from where we were with our kayaks. So this was one bird that we saw, and it was one of those things as we're passing going up, we got a count, and then we kept paddling along. The other big one that we saw a lot of was a short-billed dowitcher.
And that is a little bit bigger.
Yes, so that's a bigger bird. That's now, and they have a very kind of sewing machine action when they're searching for food. It is. And then, of course, a bird that we do, and some of these birds we see in Vermont, dowitchers we certainly pick up, ruddy turnstones we pick up. This was another bird that we saw. We were back in one of these ponds, about 6 miles back. I came around a corner and found 6 of them. Now, that was the first ruddy turnstones or shorebirds we had seen for most of the day. So, but again, higher concentrations up at the Jolter Keys. These guys come back and kind of plague our common tern colonies. They like to eat tern eggs. So, but a species, again, in its wintering plumage.
And there were some other species beyond shorebirds. As we have a couple of minutes left, you can get into some other things that you saw on this trip.
We were also counting wading birds. So this is
waiting for you to describe what this guy is.
This is called the reddish egret.
Yeah.
And it is an interesting.
Quite an egret.
It has the bill, that bicolored bill. It comes in a couple different color phases. You can also find them white and also pied, which means that they have a little bit of both. We had yellow-crowned night herons that we would see. Now, up in Vermont, we get black-crowned night herons. We don't see yellow-crowned night herons, but this was a bird that we would come across in those mangrove keys and some of these little channels we would paddle in. We came up with some great shots that Walker, a lot of these shots are done by Walker Golder. He does a lot of professional photography. This is an osprey.
It's spectacular,
but
it really is.
It's a Bahamian osprey. So we were paddling along one day, and you could kind of see in the background, there's another osprey. Yeah. They had a nest that was about 6 feet up off the ground. So we were able to get out, and Walker was able to set up his tripod and get his camera going. And the Bahamian osprey is a lot lighter in the head than the ones that we see here, so it's specific to the islands down there.
I'm sorry, do you know they will stay there, Mark?
Yes, so they were breeding. They were actually, that was a breeding pair that was there, and we would come across them on a regular basis.
And this last thing that you brought back, again, beautiful photography.
Yeah, this is another great Walker shot, and I could have pulled out some individuals, but I really like this just because one day we came around, and sure enough, you would see nothing for extended periods of time, and you would come across all of a sudden a spit that would stick out, and this was a bunch of sandwich terns. There were a couple royal terns that were in there. These are terns that are bigger than the commons that I work with, but are in the same group. But
so to that end, I got to ask, a real thrill, because the common terns up here is a big part of your work.
Yes. Yeah.
So to see a cousin or some kind of ancestor, got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, and there were 800. There were about 800 of them on that point. So when you started counting them, you were just kind of like, I mean, so it was really cool to see them lift and be there.
A great trip. I need to jump in to tell our viewers that if they have a bird-related question, we urge you to pass it along to Mark. You can write to him at Audubon, Vermont, 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington, and the zip code is 05462. If you prefer, Mark prefers the email mlabarr@audubon.org. That is our program for today, Mark. Great trip. Thanks for coming in and sharing it with us.
Always fun to do so.
All right, that is our program for today. We know you have choices, so thanks for choosing us. I'm Will Michael, inviting you to join us back here each weekday afternoon for another visit Across the Fence.